overcast. And if you can bear with me 1 minute, we're trying to get the recordings going here. Get the Facebook Live going. I'll try to be patient. It's always nerve-wracking being on the radio. I feel like I got to talk. You never have a stop. Unlike court, I can go into court and have a trial and ask for a moment of silence and stand there for a minute with the judge and the jury looking at me and gather my thoughts. They give you that indulgence when you go to court. It's a little different on the radio. Little pressure on the radio, and I always feel a little pressure when I come on here. It takes me 10 minutes or so to kind of relax and get segued in. But I've got a good show today. I've got professional National Football League player, PhD sociologist, Robert W. Turner II will be joining me in about 10 minutes to discuss his book, Not for Long, which is about the life and career of a typical NFL player and the challenges that football players and those aspiring to reach the glory and heightened social status and financial rewards that come with professional sports and the price that people pay trying to achieve those things. So, are we live on Facebook, Alan? It's going to be a little delayed and renewed start here. Again, not common ground. My name is Ted McBride. This is Talk with Ted number 34. And I've been fortunate enough to be doing this radio show for about, 8 months now. We've had some great guests on. We did a show on Thursday with a wonderful, wonderful man whose name I still struggle to pronounce, Mircea Davincian, is that it?
With Camp K.
With Camp K. He is the executive director and president of Camp K, this Gastopolis Dream Foundation here in Salt Lake City, which was established in 1967 and is a camp for primarily disabled people, but has broadened its admissions to even people without disabilities, so that the camp really integrates kids with disabilities as well as kids without. And he told a great story of his life experience, an immigrant from Romania, moved to Utah when he was 18, been here 22 years. And he was a counselor at Camp K back in the late 90s and has worked his way up to president and chief executive officer. And they've got a concert taking place up at Camp K, the Ryan Shupe and the Rubber Band on Saturday night. We're going to go to that, but an opportunity for a little fundraiser for Camp K, a little entertainment. I'm going to bring my daughter, dance a little bit, although she'll probably be embarrassed by that. But if
you
folks
can count on that.
Yeah, right. She's 11. But if folks are looking for something to do, Camp K right up Immigration Canyon, just past Ruth's Diner, is an amazing facility. You know, they've got horse riding and rope courses, and they take kids of all levels of abilities and challenge them.
And adults. Yeah.
And adults, and adults too. Challenge them to face their fears, work outside their comfort zone, and learn how to succeed in this life. And we spoke about how just incredibly difficult it must be for people with disabilities. Life is hard enough without a substantial disability. Especially in these modern times, we're bombarded with negative news. About 6 months ago, I had to stop reading the news, basically, because it's just too depressing, and I'm not sure if some of it is sensationalized, if they're just trying to get clicks. I had a little bit of a hard time with the Mueller investigation, the never-ending Mueller investigation.
Lynching.
Which resulted in, of course, everybody knows, no charges, no impeachment. And I had a theory about the whole Russian investigation. And, if we think back to the election in 2016, there was a lot of news and a lot of fake news. There were stories about a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. that was a hub for a child pornography ring operated by the Democrats. There were stories about President Bush and some indiscretions in Moscow. And I don't think that there are too many of us out there that didn't consume one or more of those stories, and sort of your flavor of choice. Which side were you on, and which side did you want to believe? And the whole collusion issue, I've had a theory really since that kind of broke. I had the suspicion that both sides tried to gain an advantage in the election by trying to get some negative information on the other side, and that they were both guilty of it in some respect. And I think that we, the public at large, consumed those stories as well, and that we need to take a little bit of the blame for that too. Anybody that consumed any of those articles, or wanted to believe any of it, or point the finger at the other side, that we all played a role in it. And I don't think it was just our elected leaders that were doing that. And you've got to ask the question, well, what's motivating that? Are we that divided that we need to go to our adversaries to try to glean information to attack one another? And I think that it is precisely what the Russians hoped for, that we would just get ourselves so frenzied pointing the finger at one another that we would lose sight of what we need to do to manage ourselves and our country and our resources, and figure out how to allocate those resources and give proper incentives where they belong, so that we can get on the same page and try to operate this country as it is supposed to be operated, a democracy which requires compromise and understanding and open-mindedness. And now I see in the news again with Joe Biden apparently made some comment at some point in time that some are claiming is racist, and now we've got the racist card back in about who's a racist or who's not a racist, and it gets into a lot of micro-analyzing, and I think we've got to remember that none of us are perfect human beings, the public at large or our elected representatives or those running for office. And if we're looking for perfection in our leaders, we'll be searching for an awful long time. But on the Russian collusion issue, I think that we've all got some collective guilt. It was a relatively new phenomenon. Facebook was permeated with false information. It becomes difficult in this day and age to sort out what's real and what's not real. And we've got another election coming up next year. They're already jockeying and putting themselves in position for it. And hopefully we've learned a lesson from the past that we won't rely on the Russians or any other adversary that we have to try to resolve our domestic disputes. And I've got to say, I think Nancy Pelosi, to me, has come out as a little bit reasonable in regards to some of those issues, and backing off of impeachment claims and this and that. And I think that despite what many people think or feel about President Bush, I don't personally feel like our country is falling apart under his rule. I know that he can be a rough and tumble guy and ruffle feathers and agitate a lot of people, but I don't think that the fights are as real here on the ground as the public would like us, or as the press would like us to believe exists in the real world. I don't know how I got started with that, but I did. Jazz basketball. I always got to work in a little basketball. So we had a monumental trade just a day or two ago. We got Mike Conley coming from the Pelicans. And Mike Conley's a fantastic player, point guard, averaged 21, 22 points a game last year. And the statements that I read from him, he is looking forward to coming to Salt Lake City, playing in Utah. And I think that that's great, because this Utah's had a difficult time over the years attracting the free agent, and I don't think it was a free agent, it was a trade. But Mike Conley, I think, is excited about coming to Utah and playing for Utah, and it's going to be exciting to see next year how that plays out. Now, we did lose a couple of good ones, including one of our favorites, Kyle Korver. And we spoke about Kyle Korver a few weeks ago and some amazing things he did for my buddy Alan's family here in helping a stepdaughter who was suffering from leukemia back at the time. And Kyle Korver, MBA career man, he's got to be 13, 14 years in, one of the greatest shooters ever. We're sad to see Kyle Korver leave, and we're also sad to see Jay Crowder really put his heart and soul into his work on the Jazz team over the last few years, an exciting player, as well as last year's rookie Grayson Allen, who, lit him up for 40 points one game toward the end of the year last year. But Grayson Allen is no longer on the Jazz. But we do have a new addition for the Jazz. I'm hoping that excites Donovan Mitchell and it entices him to stay here longer, as well as the likes of Rudy Gobert and Joe Ingles, Derek Favors, and the rest. I know it's in the off season, but I love the Jazz. We've got NBA Summer League is back in Utah too, and I know that there's a few things coming to town, including a tournament featuring a team with Jimmer Fredette. So the BYU great is going to be back at the end of July.
Wow.
Still trying to get him on the show. I'd love to get Jimmer on the show.
Yeah, well, he's in town. He needs to.
Anybody out there listening that can help me get in touch with Jimmer Fredette, because we've got connections with Utah and Glens Falls and New York, and love of basketball, but maybe he needs an opportunity to promote that tournament a little bit. So this is an open invite to Jimmer Fredette to come on a program. Today, I've got a great guest, a professor who resides in New York City, a gentleman by the name of Robert W. Turner II. And he's written a book called Not for Long. And it's a sociology study of football and the culture of football and the sports industrial complex and the challenges and pressures that face young athletes who devote so much of their time, mental, emotional energy into pursuing a career in football with the hopes of making it, to the big stage, to the big NFL stage. And Robert ran that course. He was a football player back in the 80s, played at James Madison University, had a stint in the CFL, short time in the NFL, and when he was released, found himself in a very difficult position about what to do with the next part of his life.
Yeah.
And it can be really, really traumatic. And I think about professional sports figures often. We talk about mental health, and I don't think that there's anyone in this world that doesn't suffer from some insecurity.
Right.
Even if you're well off, you're still worried about the financial institutions and the crash of those institutions and what's going to come tomorrow. Nuclear war, environmental damage, global warming. We're all under immense pressure and psychological pressure. And we're going to talk about the pressure of growing up and having a lot of your investment in yourself tied up in football. So I'll be right back after the commercial break with sociologist Dr. Robert W. Turner II. Another technical malfunction. We are back. Ted McBride on Talk with Ted, number 34. I've got guest author, former NFL athlete, Robert W. Turner II. And I think we've got him on the line. Have we got him, Alan? Robert, Robert, are you there?
I'm here. I am here, yes. I sure am.
How are you? Why don't you give a howdy hello to the people of Salt Lake City, Utah?
Well, it's great to be on, and really appreciate the opportunity. I want to say hello to everybody, and I hope we have a good time together here.
We're going to have a good time together. I'm an East Coaster as well. I understand you're from Newark, New Jersey. Is that right?
I am. I was originally from Newark, went to school there and up until about high school, and then did high school in Piscataway, New Jersey, which is where Rutgers University is. As those football fans may know that Rutgers, even though they haven't fared well lately, their claim to fame is that the first football game was played there at Rutgers University in my town, Piscataway.
The first football game?
First college football game.
Oh, really?
Yes, it was.
What year was that?
Way before my time. That was Princeton and Rutgers.
Princeton and Rutgers, 100 and something years ago?
You got it.
That's amazing. Now, you grew up Newark. Newark is one of the toughest towns in America.
Yeah, I would have to say so. It's as they say, it's a hard scrabble town, and you fight hard to get out of there. But it has produced a lot of great athletes, artists, great minds, lots of great people. So I'm proud to be from Newark, and that's where Cory Booker was mayor for a couple of years as well before he wound up becoming a senator.
Sure, he did good things in Newark. I live in Salt Lake City, but I'm originally a New Yorker. Did I tell you that?
You did. I don't remember exactly where you say, but I went to graduate school in New York, lived in Brooklyn for a number of years, and got my Ph.D. from the Graduate Center, which is one of the institutions at City University in New York there, right across the street from the Empire State Building.
Ah, very cool. My very first court appearance in 1994 was in the World Trade Center before it got knocked down.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
Isn't that something?
That is.
We were suing the state of New York, and there was a courtroom there, the Court of Claims, and that was my very first court appearance. But I've got great connections in New York. I grew up in Goshen, about an hour north of New York City, up near West Point.
I'm familiar. Yeah, I've heard of Goshen. Yeah, it's beautiful up there. We used to take the train up that way to watch the leaves change.
Yeah, there you go.
And I remember as a kid, we would go up to Bear Mountain and then go up to West Point.
Bear Mountain, just a little further up, is where I grew up. We used to go to Bear Mountain, too, and to West Point. I went to basketball camp at West Point. That was back in the day when Bill Parcells was the coach at West Point for football.
Wow, that was before the Giants, huh? I didn't even realize that's where he was.
Bill Parcells was there, and I think... was Bobby Knight basketball coach at West Point?
Well, he was a basketball coach at West Point, and believe it or not, Mike Krzyzewski was Coach K. He was the assistant coach there under Bobby Knight.
Yeah. Amazing. Now, West Point, they always struggle with the football team, don't they, Robert?
They do, but you know what? You got to give a lot of respect for that program because those guys are there for more than just playing football. They get the great college experience, but they also, they get beaten up by some of the bigger teams with bigger offensive lines and defensive lines, but they give it all they got, and you got to be very proud of the way that all the academies play sports.
I bet that's got to be a different experience than the typical Division I major college programs that we're going to talk about today. It's got to be a bit different at the military academies.
Well, first and foremost, at the academies, you have to prove that you belong academically. You have to have letters of recommendation. So, they look for excellence on every level of your life, and sports is just one of those. So you can truly say that people are not attending the academies because sports is first and foremost in their minds. They want the collegiate experience, and sports is part of that. And then they go off to do other things. And some people, as you know, they're fortunate enough to make their way back into the pros, not nearly as much as they did back in the day, but, people like David Robinson who
Robinson, sure.
He became too tall to be able to remain in the Navy.
He didn't fit in the submarines anymore, right?
That's right, absolutely. But yes, and lots of great athletes on that level too.
Yeah, David Robinson, the great basketball player for the San Antonio Spurs, and I see him in the news occasionally. He's still doing great things, isn't he?
He is. As a matter of fact, he was on the night commission, I believe, to review college sports and some of the, as we would say, I will say, others may or may not agree with it, but some of the abuses that are involved in college sports. They made a great recommendation. He was on the committee along with Condoleezza Rice and others, and he has a deep vested interest not only by the fact that he played, but he has two sons. One played football at Notre Dame for a couple years, and he has a son right now who's on the Duke basketball team.
Oh, is that right?
So, yes, he does. So, he cares a lot, very deeply about the issues, very passionate about making the game safe and clean and fair for all involved.
Oh, amazing. He's a good man. Are you a father?
No, sir. I've never had the pleasure of being a father, but I will say that I'm very proud uncle. I think there's about 10. I'm an uncle 10 times over, and one of my nephews is playing football as a wide receiver, going into his second year at University of Reno. He's at the University of Nevada at Reno, and then I have another.
What conference
nephew.
are they in?
They are in the Mountain West.
Mountain West. Okay, that's
Yes.
the old
And then I have
Utah
another-
conference. Yep.
That's right. And I imagine that Utah State is in that conference right now, I
Okay.
believe. And which they were, I believe they were. And then I have another nephew who's an excellent wrestler, was a state champ as a freshman here in Virginia, did quite well his sophomore year, and he has his eye possibly, maybe trying to convince the coaches at University of Michigan that he's worth a spot on their team by the time he becomes a senior. So we're an athletic family, and we're very happy to support all of the young men and women in our family.
And that would be a great college to get into, the University of Michigan.
Yes, sir. It certainly is. I've been fortunate. I did a lot of my postgraduate school training at the University of Michigan, particularly around issues of health disparities and aging. And so the university's been very instrumental in my development in the work that I do. And I go up there every summer to get brush up on my statistics and other, methods of data collection and data analysis. And I feel very fortunate. As a matter of fact, some of the research that I do was data was collected by a Dr. David Ware and a Dr. James Jackson at the Institute for Social Research, and they were the very first group that collected data for the the NFL Players Care Association, and we're looking at that data right now to understand better on a much granular level the health outcomes for former football players.
Yeah, and the health outcomes of football players is in the news a lot the past few years. Of course, we've got the head injuries and concussions. We've had a couple of tragedies with Junior Seau and a few other players, committing suicide and donating their brains to science to be studied. But your book, Not for Long, doesn't deal with the head injuries of the NFL or football. Is that right?
That's correct. That is the work that I'm doing post-book. I'm working now. I have a grant through the National Institute of Aging, and I'm looking at what we would say kind of multiple levels of psychosocial and neurocognitive factors, both risk and protective factors, related to head concussions, and trying to understand about accelerated cognitive aging, the aging process with your brain, and if there are any links to Alzheimer's disease. So I've really thrust since the book came out last year, I believe I got this funding in August of 2017. I'm now on the faculty at George Washington University in the School of Medicine and Health Sciences, and I have a great team here locally, as well as some collaborators down at Duke University and at the University of Michigan that I'm working with on that project. I'm working on another project with folks at NYU and the medical school there, as well as the University of Arizona. There is a sleep center there, and we're looking at sleep and behavioral aspects around sleep apnea and other diseases that may affect health outcomes of former athletes, both former college football players and former NFL athletes.
And of course, there's issues inherent that we'll all be facing with respect to aging, right? Even with the best health.
That's true, and so that's what my work really focuses on now. In particular, we talk about the Junior Seaus of the world and others. We all, as you mentioned, everyone is going through an aging process. We some of us think about how come I can't remember that, right? So we in the days gone by, we would call that being old, getting old age, that type of thing. But we know that your memory isn't as sharp as it once was when you're 65, 75 years old. You don't quite have the sharpness that you used to have when you're 35 years old. So what I try to do with my work is to try to tease out through looking at MRIs and other, sophisticated, methods to see people who are athletes that have been exposed to what we would say is concussive events. So the longer that you play, you may or may not have ever been diagnosed with a concussion, but you have been exposed to concussive events, as we say. And we want to understand how the difference or what the effect of those concussive events are on the normal aging process of your brain. Does it accelerate that normal aging process? What are the groups that are most at risk demographically and social demographically, their backgrounds and their health practices, and all of those other factors that may, impact the way that your brain behaves? Are there things that people do, athletes, that they do to keep their mind sharp? How come we see decline in some athletes and not in others? So that's what I'm really trying to understand.
Oh, interesting. So that's your next project here. Is that what I'm hearing?
That is my what we would say is my empirical evidence data collection. My research science is on that. Then I have another book in the back of my mind that I'll be working on, but I won't divulge that. But there will be another book at some point that'll build on some of the ideas that I've touched in this book. But in particular, I want to open it up and look at how sports participation it impacts young ladies as well as young men.
Oh, interesting. Your book, Not for Long, is this the first book you've written?
Yes, it is. It's an outgrowth of my dissertation I spent when I was in graduate school. I started data collection originally in 2006, and I defended my dissertation in 2010. Then I took a couple more years to go back out in the field and particularly work on some of the ideas and issues and the tension that we see in college sports around the revenue generating sports, and then so that's what it took until 2018 for the book to come out.
Yeah, and it looked like you did your research from 2006 to 2015.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct.
And you interviewed a few hundred players, parents, coaches, agents. It looks like you've examined you've examined football, the sports industrial complex, I think you call it, really from the Pee Wee leagues right up through NFL retirement.
Right. And so the book, as you mentioned, the title is Not for Long, The Life and the Career of the NFL Athlete. And I've had people joke with me, you've seen the cover, we don't explicitly use the signal NFL, the shield, but we have in bold red letters NFL, and people actually, for the Not for Long, and people said, it took me a while to get that, even though it
wasn't lost on me.
Yes, but so...
Is that a picture of you on the cover?
No. That is Dana Stubblefield, who played for, he was a Kansas Jayhawk and then played for the 49ers for years. He's a defensive lineman at over 300 pounds, and I'm a, measly defensive back, and in my best playing shape, I was 205 pounds, so I couldn't pull off a 300-pounder.
Really? 205 is all you were?
That's what I was, 205 pounds and 6 foot. And so, of course, my deal was to be fleet-footed and get out of the way or bring the boom. I love hitting people. I was a wide receiver in college, but then I moved over to defensive back my last 2 years of college and then throughout the pros. Okay,
and then you played in the Canadian Football League?
I did. Well, actually, I'm old enough where some of your listeners may remember.
How old are you?
I'm 57 years old.
Okay.
Right, and so people will remember the old USFL, right, United States Football League.
Didn't Doug Flutie play in the USFL?
I played on I was drafted by the Memphis Showboats, and then my rights were traded to New Jersey, which was great because that's where I'm from, and so I got to play in front of the home crowd. But I was on the team when Doug Flutie was there, and if you remember, Herschel Walker played there as well. Exactly, and so I was on that team. One of the greatest ever. That's right. So I played there, and then the 2 years I went up to Canada and played 2 years for the Calgary Stampeders, which is a second home. Loved every bit of that experience up there. You really want to hear and see appreciative fans who really support their team, their town. You need to go spend some time watching the CFL. It's a great game, and the people up there are phenomenal. And so after I finished there, I had a brief stint with the 49ers. My claim to fame is that I was a backup for Ronnie Lott for a few games and throughout, the whole off season and through the practice season and just barely into the season. And so, in baseball nomenclature, you say that I had a sip of coffee, right? Or as they say, a cup of coffee. But in my real experience in the NFL, I had the sip of that cup of coffee. But I got to be out there and really understand. I was very fortunate to see a whole bunch and play next to a whole bunch of great athletes on the 49ers the years that they were winning the Super Bowl.
Ronnie Lott was one of the most tenacious players ever.
He was a great player, and I tell you what, the whole attitude on that whole team, because they had Tim Rothman, they had Joe Montana, Steve Young was on that team. Just they had an all-star group of athletes, but they weren't all-stars just because of the way they could play football or individual skills. They were all-stars because of the way they came together. They played with one common goal under Coach Walsh, and they really believed in each other and had each other's back. And so there was some learning that I had there in that opportunity that I've been able to incorporate in the rest of my life just by being around some of those great athletes.
We're going into the first commercial break, Robert. Yeah, I'm hoping that you have a Steve Young story for us because we're on the air here in Utah. But if you can bear with me a minute, we're going to go into the commercial break. We'll come back and talk about your book.
Sure will.
Be right back with Robert Turner. Talk with Ted, number 34. Robert W. Turner II, Not for Long, the life and career of an NFL player. Robert, are you with us?
Here, yes, absolutely.
Robert, I'm going to read the first paragraph from the prologue of your book to try to set this up a little bit, okay? I'd like to read the whole thing, but it's probably a little too long. But it'll give our listeners just a little bit of insight as to what your mission was when you started this project.
Sure.
Injury, indiscretion, or illness. Any one of these can instantly end a lifetime of work for the professional American football player. Fail to be in the right place at the right time or demonstrate a propensity to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and you're out. Get distracted by social, familial, or personal obligations and you're out. A single misstep can leave you benched, block your hopes of a better contract or free agency, or take you out of the league altogether. Your time on the field isn't the most brutal part of the life lived for and in the National Football League. It's the constant gnawing uncertainty of what comes next. Every player knows that NFL really stands for not for long. And at the end of that prologue, you talk about not only did I need an answer to these questions for myself, but I felt I owed it to the others who came before and who would come after me to learn that what happens and what should happen when your not-for-long career comes to a screeching halt. Now, you were talking about playing for the 49ers, and I know from your book that your not-for-long career came to a screeching halt after your stint with the 49ers.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And I appreciate you reading that because that's a good way to set it up. And that really is, in lots of respect, trying to answer the question from my own life, what happened in that after that not for long moment, and retracing my steps. And it's easy to people ask it once you get cut like me. Can you watch the game? And for the longest time, I couldn't watch the game, right? Because it stung.
Painful.
I think what's important in talking about this, I do mention that there's basically three levels of athletes in the game from when we start, right? We all start off as little kids loving the game. So we are the designated or the committed, spectator. And then as soon as, you move...
I didn't make it out of pass, punt, and kick. 5'11", 130 pounds, that was it.
That's all right. So we got the dedicated spectator, right? And then you have your journeymen, and then you have your stars. And every level that you go up, and those people who kind of at the very beginning, you're not good enough to keep on playing in what I call the sports tournament. You cycle back out, and you become the dedicated sports fan. And then the sifting continues to go on. So at every level, Pop Warner, or junior high school football, then high school. school football, college football, and even to the pros. There's this constant kind of sifting going on, and what I say is that it's basically a game of the haves and the have-nots, right? And so at some point, as long as you continue to remain in the tournament, you are in the game, so to speak. And then at some point, whether it's you're a great player and it's just retirement, it's your time to leave the game, or it's injury, or you find out that you're just not good enough to keep on playing, that's the day that you have to look in yourself in the mirror and say, okay, what's next? And
how old were you when that day came?
When that happened to me, I was 28 years old, and at that point in time, I had played football for 16 years. Right, from a young, I played more years in the game than I had years out of the game. And so, in the book, I talk about the general manager called me into the office and said, "Thank you so much," but his question to me that I heard sitting in his office is, where do you want to go now? Where do you want to go? And at that point in time,
didn't they offer you a plane ticket?
They did, and my palm got sweaty, my ears, believe it or not, they started to ring, my temperature was rising, I started to feel, just really hot, because I knew what he was not asking, where do you want us to send this ticket? He was asking it to me was, you're done, this game is done, it is finally over, you've put the helmet on for the very last time, what are you going to do with your life now? Where do you want to go to start your next phase of your life? And I was utterly unprepared for that, right?
Had you earned a degree from James Madison?
I did. I had a degree in communications at James Madison. But my life, my goal, everything that I wanted to be from a young kid was a football player. And I achieved that. Exactly. I achieved that goal, but I wasn't, of the mind that, all right, well, there's something that you're going to eventually have to do next. And so I spent what I call it as my wilderness years. I spent the next 12 years running around in the wilderness trying to figure out what I was going to do until I found myself in graduate school. Absolutely.
How old were you when you went to graduate school?
40 years old.
40 years old.
So the time I was 28 to 40, I was just essentially bouncing around trying to figure out who I was, what role would I have in life, what would bring the fulfillment, all of the things that I've been able to hear from, over 100 athletes that I've interviewed that they struggle with. I've had many guys say to me, and I think one of the most poignant points was an athlete that had played for the New York Giants and won a Super Bowl with them back in the 80s, and he was on the team in the 90s. No, I can't say this gentleman's name. He asked me not to mention him, but he was a defensive lineman. He had he was originally from Alabama, and he said to me, he called me Doc even before I had my degree. He said, Doc, he said, here's the roughest thing for me, because, listen, I was nothing but a big old country boy. I grew up on a farm, hunting, fishing. I always knew I had a place to go back to. That wasn't the issue. It was once the lights were turned off, once they, locked the door and it was all over, I was asking myself, I had this camaraderie. I loved playing in front of, a million people, winning the Super Bowl. I had structure. I had all of these things to do with my life. And then all of a sudden, here I am, 30 years old, 35 years old. Now I've got to figure out, what do I do with all of this silence? Right, and so those are some of the questions that people ask, and what I think is real important is that that's a question that doesn't just pertain to football players or for athletes. I was on a plane coming from Los Angeles last week, and a woman, in a real kind of moment of honesty, she said, I loved being a mother and I loved having my house full of kids. Now my kids are grown, they're about ready to get married, and I'm trying to figure out now, who am I and what do I do with myself?
Yeah, you talk in the book about an identity complex when the career ends for the NFL athlete.
And that's really, I think one of the biggest surprise, people ask me, well, what did you really learn about this book? And so I really go through, obviously, I try to, with as much detail as I possibly can, is to describe for the reader what it's like to actually be a football player. Everything from the moment, in my case, when I was about 8 years old and I decided I want to play football, and so my eyes and my life and everything was dedicated to just having fun and loving to play sports. But that really kind of was my years, and my days were all mapped out, right?
Was your talent pretty evident even at that young age?
I think so. I mean, I think, I was a best athlete in my high school and that kind of thing. I probably could have, I don't know if I would have made it to the pros, but I probably had a good shot at maybe playing baseball. I could have played college basketball, but it was just, football was really where my talents just shined. And I'm very fortunate to come from a town in Piscataway that has a lot of great football players. So, we just kind of produce a ton of ball players that go all over the country playing football. In college, we have a number of guys in the pros, and so that was also where I got a lot of glory from. So this was easier to play that way. But where I think people ask, okay, what is one of the surprising things that came out of the book, is that when we're talking about how do people make this transition from an unwanted, from an identity and a role that they're playing that really defines them and that they're very proud of and they want to hold on to as long as they possibly can. What happens when that role is ripped away from you and you have no choice, but you have to figure out how to keep moving and where to go to next in your life? And I've had people who, just last night I had dinner with a high school friend who had her son here at George Washington looking to possibly play baseball. And what she said to me, she said, this book, as a mom whose son wants to go and play college sports, this book was really important to me. She goes, but I can see this application in so many ways. She's a university professor. She goes, I really want all of my students and my colleagues to read this book because it has a lot of life lessons. What do you do when the ceiling roof comes caving in and the thing that you love to do you can no longer do? How do you recreate yourself? How do you keep going, dust yourself off, and keep moving?
I'm going to read another quote from the preface of your book. An important academic goal of my research is to reintroduce sport as a primary location for critical investigation. Since the 1990s, it has been pushed to the fringes of sociology. Of the nearly 55 sections within the American Sociological Association, not one concentrates on sport as a subfield. Explain that to us. What are the 55 sections of the American Sociological Association, and where do you come off writing a book that's outside those sections?
Well, I guess you could say that I've really following the footsteps of Dr. Harry Edwards. Some of you may know Dr. Harry Edwards. You may have seen his face even if you don't know him. But he is who we consider to be the father of the sociology of sports here in America in particular. He was really involved. He was a college athlete.
Cal Berkeley professor, is that right?
He's a professor at Cal Berkeley. He was at San Jose State as an athlete for years, and he was also a mentor to a number of athletes back in the '68 Olympics. The very famous Olympics where John Carlos, where they held their fists up in solidarity.
Right.
And so he was behind that. So he's been talking about how important sports is to society. And really what I try to argue is that within sports, we can basically see the kind of values in our society. We can see how people get along, how they don't get along. We can see things about race. We can see class. We can see gender. We can see basically all of the good and all of the bad in society by understanding and by examining how sports works. And I'll give you an example of that. A modern day kind of real important example right now is that LeBron James, he has said publicly, he grew up in a hard scrambled area in Akron, Ohio. And he said, he didn't grow up around white people. He didn't trust white people, didn't know anything about white people, was afraid of white people in some respects. He said, but he was fortunate enough to be able to play basketball, and he was given a bike. And that bicycle allowed him to ride all around town, finding the best basketball games that he could possibly find, let him out of his own neighborhood so he got to see the world in a little different way. And then he got to play competition on the white side of town, the black side of town. And he said through sports, it helped him understand that there are good and bad in all people. And I think that's a very important lesson. And as you know, LeBron has started his own school, his own education academy. And one of the things that he does with every one of those students is he gives them a bike. He says because that bicycle gave him as a child the opportunity to see the world differently. And so this is a beautiful illustration, as far as I'm concerned, of how sports can help shine a light on many different issues in society.
Yeah, and I think LeBron James is a pretty special person, and he, of course, didn't go to college. And I've got a little theory, it's a little speculation, Robert, but I think LeBron James is going to do something great after his NBA career is over, and I think that it's going to involve creation of some kind of league or system separate from the NCAA that allows inner city kids, those of some for not so well off, to earn a living playing basketball and not just putting on the uniform for school and going through the motions in a college when they may not have a strong interest in pursuing those things. But,
well, I wouldn't put it past LeBron. I mean, I think in so many different ways, LeBron is really, we are fortunate enough to see in the decisions that he makes and in his career, he's giving us a whole new game plan or a whole new blueprint of what it means to be a modern athlete. He's no longer, now I have to preface this by saying he's the best or one of the best basketball players in the planet and has been so for over the last decade. So he's a little different than many of us. But he has shown that, instead of kind of just taking a paycheck and going home, he showed that, you can have influence. You can use your sports and have influence. You can build your brand, and you can, determine what kind of society that you want to live in. And he's challenging all athletes to do that same thing on maybe some have the ability to be on a grand level like he does, but then maybe others are just doing things in the communities that they came from. But LeBron certainly is not just selling sneakers and going home. He's making a deep commitment to things much more important than just basketball alone in the communities that he touches.
Well, and I think in that sense, LeBron James is like Robert W. Turner, because you're doing the same. Hey, Robert, we're up against another commercial. If I can have you hang on. When we come back, we're going to get into what inspired you to write the book.
If a former conservative elected Utah Attorney General, now leaning left, and a transplanted liberal New York attorney, now leaning right, can find common ground, anybody can. Welcome to Common Ground Radio with Mark Shurtleff and Ted McBride.
Welcome back. I got to correct that. It's not Common Ground Radio. It's Talk with Ted. A show about nothing. I've got distinguished professor, author, former NFL player, and general all-around stud, Robert W. Turner. Robert, you still with me?
Of course I am, and you're just way too kind. I appreciate all of the accolades there you shower on me.
You deserve it, and I think that I often think about the life of a professional athlete. I always remember Dr. J. Years ago, I read something about Dr. J saying that basketball gave him a great head start on life. And I was a young kid at the time, and I thought, what? That's crazy. You've made it. Isn't that it? Isn't that your whole life? Isn't it then sort of all over, or sort of a easy ride after that? I think a lot of people, young boys growing up, think if they can hit it big, achieve that social status and that financial independence, and live the life of dreams. But that's not so for many players, isn't it?
It's true, and I'm really glad you bring that point up, because that's exactly what I thought, and I think many people have that thought. But, there was a time in my life when I was done. I remember I moved to Los Angeles. I write about this in the book. I moved to Los Angeles, and I just had this one moment of clarity, and probably walking down the beaches in Venice Beach or something like that. And I realized, even though I had no idea what I was doing with my life, where I was going to go, I was kind of wandering aimlessly in the wilderness, as we say. I did know. I had this thought in my mind. I said, at 28 years old, 27, 28 years old, if I've accomplished the greatest thing in my life already, then that means I'm going to live a pretty doggone sad life from here on out. I hope that football isn't the greatest thing that I do, in my life, or the greatest accomplishment, or the greatest contribution that I make to society. So I didn't know what I was going to do, but I think even people who make a ton of money like Dr. J and others, you've still got to figure out, well, where do I go from here? What do I do now? Even if I have money, I have fame, I have all of these other things, don't I have another purpose besides just taking up space because I've accomplished a whole bunch by the time I was 30, 35 years old?
Yeah. The success myth, I think you call it.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think when I was at Newark, New Jersey last week, fortunate enough to go back to my hometown, and as we said, there's a lot of kids in those neighborhoods that are back in Newark that have, odds that are long and against them. But I did share with them that you have to have a passion. You've got to figure out what it is that you really love to do and pursue that passion. And I told those young people there, and I was very fortunate to be able to say this, but I said, I never thought that I was going to, after my playing career, that somehow or another I was going to be a scientist. I never thought that I was going to get a PhD. Never thought in a million years that a prestigious university like Duke University, where I came from before here, George Washington University at the Medical School in Health Sciences, that they would hire a guy like me from my background, right? I said, but I'm doing something that somehow or another I've been given the God-given ability and the talents to do this. And, truthfully, and I hope my boss doesn't hear this, but I would do this job for free because I love it. It is, I had no idea that this is what I was really, going to be good at and what I could do to help somehow or another make a contribution to help other people. And that's what I think. If I can leave that message with family and athletes and all young people who are trying to figure out, or anyone in their life, where do I go next? What do I do with my life? If I can impart any message, it's that one right there. Find out what you're passionate about. Figure out how you can help other people. Find out what you would do even if you didn't have a dime in your pocket, and then go do that thing.
And then a bit of your book is about how the college program and the NCAA and the eligibility requirements and the coursework that sometimes it stifles that creativity for the college player, and they're kind of put through a regimented program with courses that they know that they can pass and that sort of thing, and so it can sort of not develop people for skills that they need beyond the game.
Well, I think a great example of that in the book, again, the book is called Not for Long, right? The Life and the Career of NFL Athlete.
3.3 years is the average, right?
Exactly. There's a football player in there who's a dear friend of mine. I didn't know him. I got to know him through the book. His name is Philip Bobo. He was a scholarship athlete that played at Washington State. Washington State Cougars, a wide receiver. And he, when he first arrived on campus, he wanted to join a fraternity, and the requirements for the fraternity was to get a 3.0. So he got a 3.0 his first year in college, or his first semester, or something like that.
That was better than me.
And you're a lawyer now. But what happened is the academic advisors for the football program, he really wanted to go into radio, TV, film. He wanted to learn how to produce TV shows and movies. He wanted to learn how to write shows. And they had that at the school, but the academic advisors would not allow him to do it because they said, you have too much demands on football. You won't be able to do that. And he kept pushing until finally he just said, they're not going to let me do what I want to do anyway, so I don't care. And he just skirted by and he said to me, I got a degree in social science or whatever that means. He goes, but they really stifled my creativity and my desire to learn, and it was a bad experience for him academically. And I think that that's more common than we like to believe, because we're talking about young young people, and we're always told that you can do whatever you want, but sometimes when big revenue-generating sports like basketball and football in the NCAA, they want you to focus on the bottom line that they have, and that may not necessarily equate to the same passion that you have beyond sport.
Yeah, they just want you to keep your eligibility, get that 2.0, right?
I had a conversation with a bunch of athletes at the University of Michigan, because as I mentioned to you, I go up there quite often. I was fortunate enough to be a guest lecturer in one of the classes there, and I had a bunch of football players, basketball players, and I had women's basketball players, a bunch of athletes. And I said to them, I want you to think about this for a second here. I said, they pay your head coach $7 million a year. And I said to them, with that $7 million, what do you think is the most important metric that they use, or measuring stick that they use to determine whether he's going to keep his job or not?
Wins and losses. Wins
and losses, absolutely. So they promise you what they promise you is they say that you will get an education. Right? They say you'll get a degree, but they don't promise that you'll get educated, right? Because in many instances, they want to keep you eligible. And not everybody, because people will listen to me and say, hey, listen, I went to college, I got an education. That wasn't my experience there at all. But one of the things that I do argue about in the book is that these revenue-generating sports at many colleges in the NCAA is what they will do is they will take advantage and exploit the most vulnerable people. And those are often guys and young ladies who are first-generation athletes. They don't, no one else in their family went to college. They don't know how the college system works.
First-generation college?
First-generation college that happen to be playing sports, right? They don't necessarily know, so you have to rely on the academic advisors to tell you what to do, or the coaches to help steer you and guide you. Well, that makes you vulnerable because, of course, the academic advisors often are there to make sure that the overall grade point average of the team stays up high. But that doesn't mean that that's going to make sure that you get the education that you went there for.
You even write in your book a story about a player in college who had told the coach that he needed some extra time in class or some tutoring, and he actually was reprimanded for that because he wasn't devoting enough time to football.
Absolutely. That young man was in my class when I was at the University of Maryland doing a postdoc there. And he said, Doc, can I come by your office? I need to get some paperwork signed. And I said, sure. I said, come on anytime. Just let me know when you want to go. And he said, well, where is your office? And I said to him, it's on the top of the syllabus. You have a copy of the syllabus. All you have to do is find the syllabus and then come on over to the office.
He didn't have a syllabus.
That's what he said. I don't have my syllabus. And I looked at him, and I was confused. I said, what do you mean? I said, I gave it to you. He said, well, the football team makes us turn it in. And I said, why did they make you turn it in? He said, I don't know. He said, they tell us every day what our assignments are, and every week what we have to do for the end of that week. They let us know. And I said to them, you mean to tell me they don't trust that you, as a young man, can't manage your own academic schedule? They don't trust that you can get your own work done?
And isn't that the point of college, to try to learn those skills? That's
exactly correct. And he said to me, I never thought about it that way. He said, I just do what they tell me to do. And that, again, and he came from a really bad area of Baltimore, kind of like if people are familiar with The Wire. He came from that kind of environment. And when they recruited him, he was very frustrated in the story that you were mentioning. He said, the coach told me when I came here that grades and education was really important. And then when I asked for an opportunity to miss practice so I can go see my professor, they told me no. He said, well, then I lost all respect for my coach at that moment because you lied to me. You brought me here with believing one thing, but then what you did is you had a whole different priorities, and you wouldn't allow me to get the education that I came here for.
And we saw that in full glaring light in 2012 with the University of North Carolina and the efforts that they were going through to change grades or kind of cheat the system to keep some of the student athletes eligible.
Absolutely, and I can say from firsthand, I write about that again in the book, right? But firsthand knowledge, because I was at the University of North Carolina at that very time. and I met Mary Willingham. I had an opportunity to interview lots of the athletes myself.
And Mary was basically the whistleblower on that, right?
She was absolutely, and just she writes about it in her book as well. But she told me in great detail, and I've had it, verified by other athletes who were there at the same time. She said, here was the problem. She said, I was there to help athletes and identify whatever kind of learning needs they have and those type of things. And she said, we had an athlete in particular that was taking one of these bogus classes where you had to write a 10-page paper in this or a 20-page paper in the summer. She said, and I knew this particular young man had he couldn't read. He had a reading problem, and he got an A in this class. And I'm thinking to myself, how in the world, who put him in that class? How did he get an A in that class? And then when she went on to the administration and told him about that and some other issues, they told her to remain silent. And when she could no longer remain silent, they fired her. And she sued the university and won a lawsuit of over $350,000.
Oh, good for her.
And so it was really as egregious as we hear it is.
Yeah, and that comes from the Tar Heels, UNC, great school.
It is what we call, and I'm very fortunate to again have done a PhD. I consider myself a Tar Heel. I did my postdoc there. But they say that they're, a public Ivy, but I think that's a big stain. And when I first went there and I told people there in athletics about my book, I was interested in working with athletes. As a matter of fact, I even dedicated and said, hey, listen, on my own time, I'd love to have a summer book club with the athletes. But for whatever reason, they said, it's just it will take up too much time for athletes to do that, so we just can't, require or recommend that they do it. If anyone wants to do it on their own, great, but we just don't want to take away from their preparation for the football. And I said, this is summertime. This is summer. How they should be able to, we can read and we can talk about these different issues, but they just did not want to support it.
Then those kids in the football programs, too, they have another challenge, especially the ones that don't come from families of means, is that the football takes up so much time, and then the schooling takes up so much time, is that they don't have any opportunity to work.
That's absolutely the case, we can touch on that. I hear the music in the background, so I'm assuming that means we're getting ready to go into another break.
Well, let's blow right through this one, and we'll
great.
So we have enough time.
Well, I think, this is, again, what you're bringing up is a really important point as we talk about. And here's the thing. I'm not going to say that every school is like this, and I'm not going to browbeat and single out the University of North Carolina. But I've been at a number of different schools now, and I went through this system myself. My brother was a scholarship football player at Purdue. And again, I always ask the question, if you think about the NCAA and you think about if anyone's ever, they really want to see this in full glory, is just be a professor and teach a class during basketball season. You have 16 weeks of classes, and basketball players almost miss a whole full month of classes because of what they travel. And so you can't penalize the athlete for not being in class. They have excused absences, but it also means that they cannot learn and be exposed to the material in the same way that most other students can be, simply because they're absent. So really, it cheats their whole academic experience. They just don't get the full academic experience often.
Speaking of academic experience, what kind of student were you in high school?
That's a good question. I think I tell people I am the least likely person you probably would ever meet that went on and got a PhD. I probably, as in the book, we read, whether I knew this or not, my parents, I come from a working class parents, and my family and my parents always told me, just as long as you can say to us that you did your best, we're happy. And, I guess I probably, like many kids, learned very early that C's get degrees, right? And so as long as I was one of those kids that as long as I wasn't making any noise, I was passing my classes, not a stellar person, but not the worst person, then I would be all right. I got very, very lucky that my football abilities, my athletic abilities, were able, and my grades were good enough to get me into college. But by no means can you look back in my academic record and see anything other than an average student until I went into I persuaded the folks at the Graduate Center that I belong in a PhD program, and then there I got basically a 4.0 all the way through my PhD program.
Right?
So somehow or another I got smart along the way.
Well, let me back you up a little bit. So I was obsessed with basketball when I was younger, and I got a financial aid package to play at Skidmore College up in Saratoga Springs, New York. It wasn't an athletic scholarship.
Great school.
Great school. And they rewarded me with some financial aid. It was terrific. I played basketball for a week, quit the team. My father nearly had a heart attack. But I wanted to party more than I wanted to play basketball, and got my life together and had a second chance and got to law school. The rest is history. Now I'm on the radio with you. But I can recall I was a bit underprepared for the rigors of college, and I remember an English class that I had where the girl next to me was not too impressed with my intellectual abilities at the time. And I know that you had an experience in an English class with a paper that you wrote where you were criticized a bit. Was that your freshman year at James Madison?
It was my freshman year and one of my very first classes, and it was just a god-awful experience. And I guess kind of what's interesting is, I didn't write about this type of stuff in the dissertation because my whole focus is I wanted to explain to people through the words of athletes what the career and the life of athletes were all about. But my publisher and one of my mentors for the book said, you need to bring these stories out. And, from my background, again, coming from inner city Newark, New Jersey, and going on to college in a predominantly white school, and it was very obvious that myself and most of the black men on campus were all athletes. And I was sitting in a class.
So were you the dumb jock?
Exactly. That was the label that they put on me, and of course, I was very
and African American on top of that.
Exactly. And, so in my freshman year, they asked us to write a paper, and I'm sure deservedly so. She looked at my essay. She had marked it up. All those of us who are a little older, we remember when they used to take a red pen or a red marker and they would flag stuff on there. Well, mine looked like a road map. But, she got to everyone, and she was encouraging everyone in their writing and handing their papers to them. But in the book I write, when she got to me, she made a very, prominent move that said, and some of you need to go to the reading and writing lab to get better because you're not going to pass this class. She took my paper from on top of the top pile, turned it upside down, folded it, and slid it to me. So everyone
right
there,
in front
again,
of everyone.
Exactly. Just reinforce that, some of you may not even belong in this school. And so I think a lot of people, and I know people, that at that point would just say, you know what, if that's all you expect of me, I'm going to put the least amount of effort into this thing, and I'm just here to play ball. But, my parents, my grandparents, and others who had instilled a lot in me taught me that I'm not going to be defeated by anybody on any level. So I marched right on over to the reading and writing lab and spent the whole semester there to the point where I could get, a B in that class.
Yeah, and so as painful as that may have been, you may not be here talking about your book, but for that, huh? Because it sounds like that was a bit of a important experience in your college life.
It was, and for me, it worked. She has no idea what it touched on in some of the earlier, my earlier experiences when we moved from Newark to Piscataway, where I was immediately put into a remedial reading and remedial education classes, and I knew that I didn't belong there, and I was again working with that whole dumb jock type of a thing. She opened that wound right back up. Absolutely, right? So, by that little gesture alone, she could have crushed me, and many people probably would have been. She didn't know that she was working with a fighter, and I was not willing to be defined by that. But those are really salient moments, and those many times athletes that are on very campuses right there in Utah and other colleges around the country where you're playing, major college football, some of these athletes are dealing with these very things. We don't know what they're going through.
Yeah. And you basically have to go through the NCAA program if you want to make it to the NFL.
Well, that's the thing. And so what I argue in the book is that if you want to understand the kind of social significance and the cultural power status that the NFL has, you have to look at it as an organization or an institution that is comprised of junior football, high school football, college football, and the pros. And what I talk about in the book is essentially what you're taught very early in football in particular, is that there's one path, one road, and 99% of all the people who came before you traveled the same road. And if you follow the game plan that we teach you and we tell you that's been prescribed for you, then you have a chance to remain in the tournament, and if you're good enough, you'll make it into the NFL. But never
provided you
that.
Succumb to everything, don't challenge anything, don't exercise
Absolutely.
any independence, free thought, follow the rules, say what the coach does, do what the coach says.
That's exactly right. And what we call it in sociological terms, we call it a football habitus, right? Is where it's not only do you have to be a great athlete, but you have to have the right mindset. You have to be willing to, again, not be critical. You have to follow the rules. If you are willing to do those things, then you got a shot. But the moment that you question it, they will simply find another way to replace you with someone else. Because in the NFL, they have this reserve army of labor that are of all of these 100, almost 200 Division I football programs that are producing kids every year, and every one of those kids would love a shot at the NFL. So if you don't conform, they'll get rid of you and plug somebody else in there.
Yeah, amazing. I'm amazed, too, at the structure of college football. In your book, you talk even about surveillance of the players, constant surveillance of the players, to make sure that they are conforming.
Sure, and I think a good way to think about this, Jerry Jones, we all know Jerry Jones, well, actually it was Jimmy Johnson, who was the head coach for the Dallas Cowboys way back when they were winning all of their Super Bowls. And they talk about, and this is the thing that I really emphasize again in the book, is that, football is one of those, it's an institution of the have and have-nots. You have the stars and your journeymen. I was a journeyman that allowed myself to be in and around professional football for 4 years, but every season I was on the cusp of, am I going to make the team or am I not going to make the team? Every year was that person. But then you have on the other hand, with Jimmy Johnson was talking about Emmitt Smith, and the reporters one day learned that Emmitt Smith was sitting in the meeting and he was falling asleep. And Jerry, they asked Jimmy Johnson, they said, well, I thought you had a rule that people can't fall asleep. He says, well, listen. He said, it depends on who you are in the team. If Emmitt wants to fall asleep, I will get him a pillow and ask him if he's comfortable. But if you're the 53rd man on the roster and you fall asleep, we will get you a one-way ticket out of here. And so that's really kind of where it is. Where are you in the pecking order in sports? And as long as they find that they can make money from you, and I believe it's the same way in college, as long as you are of use and that you're helping the college coach win games, then great. But at the moment that they feel like they need to get rid of you and replace you with somebody else, they're constantly, particularly in the NFL, the moment you sign your contract, they are out there looking for somebody to replace you, because you hear coaches always say in interviews, we're always looking for ways to upgrade and get better in every position.
Yeah, and there's always a risk that of injury for all of you.
Exactly, and so there was a time where somebody looked at Emmitt and said, you know what, as great as he was and as great of a guy as he was, he's no longer producing the way we need him, so we need to now replace him with somebody else.
Yeah, amazing. Unlike the NBA, you can't go from high school to the NFL. You've got to be out of high school for 3 years, right?
Yes, sir, and that is a function of the players' agreement from the NFL. They have said it. They've said basically that your body is not physically mature enough, and all of these other things. But really, it just comes down to they're trying to protect the actual labor that's in the NFL for a number of years before kids are able to come out and play. Now, I will argue this as well. I don't think by any stretch of the imagination, no matter how good a player is, I don't think an 18-year-old can step out on the field in the NFL and is ready to play against 30-year-old men. No way. Right. It's just too much. It's like the question.
It's not basketball.
No, it's not basketball. And people say, well, can the best college football team in the country, Clemson or Alabama, can they beat the worst NFL team? No way. Anybody who's put on pads, spent any time on a field, practiced with those guys, you still got to remember, even the guys on the worst team in the pros, they were the best players in college. So you're talking about grown men who will take your lunch and eat it and not ask a second question about it.
Yeah. Now, you decided to go to James Madison. Why James Madison?
Well, when I was coming out of high school, I was not recruited as heavily in the beginning. And again, today's world of what we call the sports industrial complex in the book, I refer to that. And then we also talk about kind of the professionalization of youth sports. Well, back in the days when I was playing in the late 70s and in the 80s, it was not like this at all. You really weren't getting recruited heavily at all until your senior year. Right,
we relied on the Parade magazine, All Americans.
That's right. I write all about that.
Yep,
right, I remember
that.
Yeah, I remember that very much. My brother was a Parade All American, but you remember the old Street and Smith magazine and all of that. That's where you got to learn about the competition around the country. But when I came out of high school, I was very after my senior year of football. I was not recruited that heavily. But then James Madison came knocking on the door. They had just moved from Division 3 2 years prior to me getting there, and the year before I got there, they moved to Division 2, and they said, we're moving to 1AA. And, they showed faith in me. When they came and they met me, the head coach said to me, he said, you're going to get a lot of offers, and there are going to be a lot of people that will come to you, and they will tell you that they want you. And he says, but here's the difference. We've looked at you, we see you, we really would love you to be here, and we need you. We need players like you. And so as an 18-year-old kid, that's very impressionable to hear someone say, we really need you to be here. That was all that there was. And then shortly thereafter, within a couple of months or a month after, I got a call and invited to go to Penn State.
You got tempted by Joe Paterno.
I did, indeed. But I was also raised to that loyalty is really important, and the coach made me feel that I belonged there, and it wound up working out really good because the first day on campus, I found my way on the football field and stayed on playing for 4 years as a starter. So, and we actually had a lot of great players. If people remember Charles Haley, who's in the Hall of Fame right now, we played together at James Madison. Gary Clark, who was part of the Smurfs when the Redskins were winning Super Bowls. We were at James Madison. He and I went together. We had Scott Norwood, who's the famous wide right kicker for the Buffalo Bills. We were all on teams together, so we put a lot of guys in the pros through the years that we were there.
So back to your book, what do you see are the main challenges for these football players when they finally are sort of forced out of the game? We see these days, some early retirements. We just had Rob Gronkowski retire. He's only 29 years old compared to Tom Brady, who's going to play until he dies, apparently. He can play till he's 90. But, in the media, we hear about the gigantic contracts, the long-term careers, and I think the public at large thinks, so if you made the NFL, well, then you're set for life. Were you set for life financially at 28?
Oh, by no means. As again, I was a journeyman, right? And I played in a different era. So, I didn't have very much money when I got done at all. And so life was completely different for me. Now, there were, back in the day, some guys that did make a lot of money. But even, you can't believe, or you have to put in context these big contracts that we hear. The only money that you can count on in the NFL, unless you are a superstar like a Gronkowski or a Tom Brady, but even with them to a certain degree.
I know what you're going to say. It's the signing bonus.
It's the signing bonus. And even the signing bonuses are conditional. We give you a great example of that very situation right there. We know that, the 49er who decided that he no longer wanted to play anymore. He's on the jacket of my book. Chris Borland, who played at University of Michigan, third-round draft choice, went to San Francisco, started right away, signed a 5-year contract with a signing bonus of over $1 million, $1.5 million or something like that. He decided after his first year he did not want to play anymore. The NFL sued him to get the signing bonus back.
Really?
The 49ers, yes, because and here's the thing that's crazy about it. If they give you a signing bonus and then they decide to cut you, you get to keep the bonus. But if they give you a signing bonus and you decide that for whatever reason you no longer want to play, you got to pay them back the bonus.
They've got all the power, the owners, don't they?
Exactly, and that's built into the collective bargaining agreement, which is unfortunate. So,
and you talk in your book too. It seems like the competition among the players themselves actually hurts the players' union to try to have a consolidated voice in bargaining with the owners.
Well, you're right. There's the one chapter that you're referring to is where it starts off with Art Modell giving a famous quote that says, what you have with the NFL owners is you have 32 fat cat Republican owners who run their business like socialists. And so people ask, well, what exactly does he mean there? So, what's really important is to understand with the NFL, the way that they structure the league is that the owners' revenue share between all 32 owners. So the revenue, the teams from the TV contracts and everything else, they know how much money they're making from the beginning of the season. There's just a little bit of fluctuation in terms of merchandise sales and then who goes deeper into the playoffs. But by and large, the NFL, the owners recognize that instead of competing against one another when it comes to finances, that they need to share the pot with one another. But what they've done is they've convinced the players that, you should be paid based on your merit. If you're a higher draft choice, you should get more money. If you're a free agent and walk on, you should get less money. And so what that does is that they competes the athletes against one another at every level for resources and, retirement benefits, both under the contract that you're playing under when you're in the league, but it's the same thing as when you get out of the league. So essentially, you don't start to receive financial benefits and health benefits and those other retirement benefits unless you've played 4 years in the league.
Which is longer than the average career.
It's convenient that the average player plays 3.3 seasons, and then you don't really get the best package of benefits until you've played 6 seasons, right? So a full 2/3 of the players that has ever put on an NFL uniform never actually gets those benefits. So you get the players who are highly drafted make a lot of money. It's an absurdity of riches because they get more money. But it's the everyday journeymen, the laborers who are taking the same exact risk as everybody else. They walk away basically only making the money that they get for playing each and every game they play.
Amazing. Robert, we're running up against another commercial break. We've got one more segment to go, and we're going to try to sum up what you're trying to accomplish with this book. We'll be right back with Robert Turner, author of Not For Long. Welcome back to Talk with Ted, a show about nothing. Number 34, Robert W. Turner, author of Not For Long, The Life and Career of the NFL Player. Robert, we still got you on the line?
You sure do.
I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's always the fastest 2 hours of the day for me when I'm on the radio here. I feel like I could talk to you for hours. But your book, talks about the power disparity between the owners and the players, exploitation. I don't know if that's not the right word, maybe a lack of care, especially about post-playing careers. And, football is a dangerous, dangerous sport. We see guys getting hurt, paralyzed, the brain injuries, and there's a tremendous personal sacrifice that goes into making it to the higher echelons of the game. And again, I think the public at large thinks that players should have nothing to complain about. You've made it. If you complain, you're a bit of a spoiled brat. But I think that football in particular, with the masculinity of football, the never give up attitude, never show you're hurt, never complain. I think it develops a culture of where people are fearful of seeking help or admitting some limitations. Do you think that's true?
I think that is definitely true, but I think that there are, I'm fortunate I'm involved with and I'm a member of the NFL Alumni Association. And we're starting to hear, again, maybe taking cues from people like LeBron, right? Or other athletes who have said, hey, listen, I've had mental health issues, I've dealt with depression and these other things, and saying that, hey, as a man, you can still ask for help. You can still show that you're vulnerable. You can still be tough. You can be, out there playing a violent sport. But yet, if you have needs, you have to ask for help. And so we're putting pressure on the league themselves to understand that part of the problem, again, is, right, where I had a football player once who played for the New York Giants who said he was giving a lecture once to some people who wanted to know what football was all about. He said, I was at one point in my career, I was going through a really bad divorce. We had 4 kids together, and it was during the middle of the season. He goes, and I couldn't call the coach and say, Coach, I need to stop playing for a little while. I need to take a mental health day here or there. Yeah, he couldn't do that, right, because they can get rid of you and replace you at that point. But, so that's a vulnerability that an athlete has, that even if he recognizes that he needs help, he may not be able to ask for it because of the conditions of the game and the labor agreement. So, we're putting pressure on trying to figure out how to do those things, how to get people to take care of their mental health in a long-term approach, not just on a day-to-day basis. So you're right. There are some big challenges, but I think that there are a lot of people who are committed to trying to figure out how to make the game better and safer for people.
And I see the same in the NBA. I've got a lot of NBA friends on LinkedIn, and I'm going to have a gentleman on in a couple of weeks, Malcolm Lemons, who played a short stint professional basketball, writes a book, Lessons from the Game, and he's like you, where he's trying to help professional athletes then transition into what I'll call normal life. Mm-hmm. It's got to be tough when the lights go out and the crowd stops screaming.
Well, again, what we have to think about is not everybody has the privilege or they have the desire or have the talent when they're young. They're coming up and they're seeing their role models and they're coming out of places and say, that person looks like me. LeBron is what I want to be, right? And so they spend all of their time doing that, and maybe they don't come from the best school systems, or they don't have the role models to show them how to develop those other parts of their life, and then all of a sudden, you find yourself maybe in basketball, you go and you play until you're 30 overseas, but then you look and you say to yourself, all right, I graduated from college. I've been spending the last 6-8 years in the pros. I don't have the resume to compete with the same people that I went to college with. What do I do now? We're trying to help people understand that when I'm in my classroom and I'm working with the athletes, I tell them, I say, listen, I want you to be like a Renaissance man. I want you to be like a Renaissance woman. I want you to be like Leonardo da Vinci, who was great and excelled in painting and sculpture and engineering and all of these other things, because I guarantee you, if you think about it and if you think about what you love, you have so many other skills and desires and passions that extend far beyond sports. So let's excel in everything that we do. These are the messages that we're trying to change and trying to drive home with young people today.
Yeah, and I imagine, too, with some financial literacy for some, many NFL players find themselves in economic straits shortly after their career ends.
I think it's criminal if you think about it. For sure, athletes, if you're brought on campus and you have these dreams, and no matter what the university tells you, they tell you it's not supposed to be this way. But when I was in North Carolina, I asked a classroom of athletes, I said, why did you choose this? And it was all different sports. I said, why did you choose to come to North Carolina? And I said, the one thing that you can't give me for your answer is because it's a great school. And I said, and the reason you can't give me that answer is, I said, because every place that recruited you told you they were a great school. The kids all started laughing. It was true. I said, so let's have an honest conversation. Why'd you come here? And they said, because it gave me the best chance to make it to the pros.
Best chance to make it to the pros.
And if that's the case, it seems to me that these athletes need to have financial literacy, but I would actually take another step farther and say it's amazing to me that how many young people graduate from some of the finest universities in this country and have never in college been given any real financial literacy.
Yeah.
We can do better on all those levels.
Yeah. How do you feel about college players being paid?
Well, that's a great question, and when we go back to the whole LeBron thing right now, as you may know, and we definitely want to let some of your listeners know that I was in the movie Student Athlete, which was produced by LeBron James, an HBO documentary. You can go on HBO right now.
Do you know LeBron?
I have not met LeBron. I have met the other producers from his production company. We're hopefully going to do a panel discussion and show the film. Congressman Al Lawson here in the U.S. Congress has put forth a bill about college athletes, and they want to show the film a second time, and hopefully LeBron will be there, and so I'm looking forward to being on a panel with him there.
Tell me the name of the film again.
It's called Student Athlete, and it's on HBO. You can find it on HBO documentary. You can find it on real-time HBO. You can go online through their HBO Go and HBO Stream. You can find it. It's also being featured on Delta Airlines across country flights. We've gotten a lot of press behind that. But, you know, in that movie, we really shine a light on some of what we would call the social injustices that athletes are confronted with, as we talked about them not getting a quality education, not being able to take internships. One of the things that most people
not having time to work.
Exactly. One of the things that people are really surprised about is that you don't really have insurance when you play for NCAA. So if you get hurt and let's say, for instance, it's your senior year or you hurt your back and you can never play sports again, the NCAA, they're not responsible for making you whole again.
Is that right? So they're not covered under any college program there, those players?
So what happens is you're covered under your own parents' health. It's different for each different school, but the point is if you get hurt playing, and it's a chronic injury, and they say, for instance, you're fine at 22 years old, you know, they've made your back feel a lot better, but then you start having these back pains from when you were, say, you're at 25 years old, but you can't go back to the school and get treatment or anything else like that. You are relying on your own health insurance. And if you don't have health insurance, then you are saddled with a chronic condition that came from you playing sports, and there is no recourse for you to get any kind of health, assistance.
Yeah, and meanwhile, it's generated all of that revenue, and those laborers didn't share in any of those profits.
Exactly. So what I say to people who ask the question, should athletes get paid, I simply say I'm not going to jump into that yet because there's so many other things that need to be fixed. But I would say by giving, an 18 to 22-year-old, whatever amount of money that you give them, is it going to fix any of these kind of exploitation issues that we're talking about? Or kind of the the inequities that are designed into the system? Do we believe truly that money is going to solve that in an individual person's pocket? And I would say no. We need to do better by fixing the NCAA, fixing the rules. Once we fix those things, then we can start to have a discussion about where the money should go.
Yeah, amazing. Robert, what were your goals when you set out to write this book?
Truthfully, my number one goal, I wrote it as a dissertation, so I just wanted to make them.
You just wanted to pass.
Exactly, I wanted to make.
You had a 4.0. You were doing all right.
But truthfully, what I hope out of the book right now, and I've seen this a couple of times, people have emailed me, they've contacted me, they've called me, and the best compliment and the best thing that can come out of this book is when I have people who say, my son or my daughter want to go play sports in college, and we sat down and we read your book, and we talked about it as a family. And we now know a lot more about this whole college thing and leading into the pros, and we're better equipped than we were before.
And I can tell you my reading of the book, it's interesting. It goes from, you chronicle the high school player the college player, the NFL, the star versus the journeyman, the labor relations, the inequities there, the long-term injuries. But I found the most interesting part of the book, that being the experience of the college player.
And, it's important. I'm glad you point that out, because you don't, in football at least, you don't get to the NFL without going through that gauntlet of college.
And then you make, about less than 1% or 1% of the college players make it to the pros?
That's absolutely correct,
and
right?
You've got about 6% of the high school players make it to the college game?
That's about 5%, exactly. So what I believe is, if we can better equip those athletes going into college, and making sure they have meaningful college experiences and they have tools that will allow them to be successful in life, whether they make the NFL or not, then their transition out of the NFL is going to be that much better.
And what can those colleges do to facilitate that?
Well, they need to be honest with athletes. Number one, they need to tell them, you know what? We're not recruiting you here to make sure that you get an education. We're recruiting you here to help us win games. That's our first number one goal. And within that,
they can actually lose their scholarships by getting hurt, right?
Oh, absolutely, because there's no guaranteed scholarship.
No guaranteed scholarship. That blows me away.
Right, absolutely. Again, every school has a little bit different. Some schools have the ability to give you 5-year scholarships. It's a case-by-case, conference-by-conference situation. But the point is, again, we bring you here to help, especially in the revenue-generating sports. Hey, let's be quite honest, right? When you're running on the track team or you're playing on the softball team, it's a different reason that we're bringing you here compared to if you're playing on the basketball or football team.
Because of the money.
Because football and basketball pay for all the other sports on campus. So you're here to help us make money. That's number one. And so now we have to say, once we agree to that and once we let the parents know and all of that, then we can now start to say, how can, with that goal in mind, we ensure that you get a quality education? This is what that means for this particular university. Once we start to rip the veil and see what's behind there, then at least kids can make an honest assessment, their parents can make an honest assessment, and they can hold to the schools to a standard that says, you promised me this, I want this for my kid.
Amazing. And Robert, we got about a minute to go, so I'm going to give you a chance to kind of sum up or tell us about your next project. What do you hope to accomplish next, or what more out of this book?
Well, out of this book, again, if somehow or another I can help athletes that have been through this process better understand kind of, how to put the pieces together and where to go next, because we're all in this brotherhood together, and young people who want to go and play football or any other sports, and they're thinking about, making decisions, letting them understand that, you can be a Renaissance person, love sports, and do so many other things, and have big goals and big dreams, and find people who can help you do those things. And so that's what I hope is, the discussions around the movie, around the book is all about. And then the other work that I'm doing around concussions, I'm doing around, mental health and aging. I'm out on a tour with other athletes. We talk about mental health. We really want people to understand what it means to have a healthy brain, take care of your brain, whether you're playing the sport or not, and then how to make sure that you are getting the proper health care treatment and all those other things to live healthy and productive lives.
There's great stigmatism that comes with mental illness, and I said it earlier, but I think that these professional athletes are under incredible pressure to not complain.
Absolutely. And the thing is, these athletes are really special people, right? But not everybody makes it all the way to the pros. What we care about are those hundreds of thousands of millions of people who had those dreams, and those dreams didn't materialize in going to the NBA or the NFL or the Major League Hockey. What about them? What do we know about their health? Can they come out and say, yes, I'm struggling here. I need help. What do I do? That's what we want. We care about them equally as much as we care about the people who did make all the headlines.
You're an amazing guy with an amazing story, a journeyman who scratched the surface of the NFL. God, I love the story about Coach Walsh or the general manager, they're saying, where do you want to go? They'll buy you a plane ticket to send you where you want to go, and there you go, out the door. But 12 years later, back to school really made something of your life, and I thank you for your time and wish you nothing but success with this book and your future endeavors, because you're doing great things that's going to help a lot of young people.
Well, I just want to thank you for the time, and I want to thank your listeners, those who've chimed in and out or stuck with us the whole time. I'd love to hear from people. You can find out about the book on Amazon. You can go to my website, robertturnerphd.com. Please email me or tweet out, and let's have a dialogue. I'd love to talk to people.
And I'm looking forward to the next book. Maybe we'll have you back on.
I'd love that. Please.
And I was a Giants fan back in the day with Lawrence Taylor and Eugene Banks and Phil Simms and Phil McConkey. That was my team.
So you remember Odessa and his contributions to the Super Bowl?
Oh, sure. I remember OD for sure.
All right. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you much.
God bless you, Robert, and good luck with everything you do.
Likewise. Bye-bye.
I'll be in touch. Folks, thanks for listening. Quick 2 hours. Great guest. Hopefully you enjoyed that. I'll be back next week. I'm hoping to have on. I've got a couple in the fire. I won't mention anyone yet.